Hello and welcome to today's program, a quick take on South Korea's new foreign policy. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Chelsie Alexandre and I'm the Policy Program Officer here at the Korea Society. And we are delighted to be joined today by Dr. Kuyoun Chung to discuss the shifts in South Korea's foreign policy, and a really important conversation to have as we continue to digest the results of last week's elections in South Korea. Briefly, I want to give a bio for Dr. Kuyoun Chung, who is an associate professor of political science at the Kangwon National University. Her research focuses on U.S. foreign policy, public opinion, and strategic narratives, as well as security issues in the Indo-Pacific, including alliance politics, regional security architecture, and maritime security. She served as a member of the Policy Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Unification, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and the Republic of Korea Navy. So we are very grateful to have her here with us today. And then with that, I think we'll just jump right in.
Okay.
So Dr. Chung, I was wondering if you could characterize South Korean perceptions of the US, Japan, and China, and describe kind of what changes in the geopolitical environment of today might be affecting these perceptions, South Korean perceptions of these countries.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the first questions. And as you can see from the slides, South Korea's kind of threat perception on regional countries has been transformed for decades. And these are the kind of recent result from survey. And as you can see from this slide, so North Korea is the kind of top one, kind of first places in the threat perceptions. Of course, because of this, all the ballistic missile tests, as well as its offensive nuclear strategy, which has been just displayed by Kim Jong-un. All of these factors into South Korean public threat perceptions. And the second place goes to China, actually. China, threat perception of China has been controversial for decades, because of this narrative that South Korea relies on the United States for security and while rely on China for economy. But that narrative has been changed, as you mentioned, about this geopolitical risk kind of occurring all over the world, because China and North Korea and Russia has been kind of aligned to one another. At the same time, this war in Ukraine as well as a Taiwan Strait crisis are kind of interlinked with North Korea's provocative behavior as well. So these two countries' threat perception has been elevated these days. While you can see from this slide, Japan and United States has very lower level of threat perception compared to other two countries. And the variation between South Korean public's progressives and moderate and as well as conservatives are changing as well. The South Korean conservative has the highest level of threat perception on North Korea as well. Maybe that's because we're going to discuss it later. They have higher level of kind of preference on nuclear kind of armament of South Korea.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really great overview of these different perceptions in South Korea, and actually touching more deeply on North Korea. How have these views, South Korean views of North Korea, evolved over the years?
Right. So as you can see from the slides, well, North Korea has been kind of dual perception from South Koreans' public perspectives. North Korea is a kind of kin nation to be reunited. We used to be the same people and in the same country. But at the same time, as North Korea kind of make military provocations and kind of coerce South Korea with militaristic instruments, we have this kind of perception of adversary as well. And North Korea recently kind of increased their production of nuclear arsenals, which is projected by 2030, they will have more than 100 nuclear warhead, which is beyond the level of minimum deterrence for a small country like North Korea. So we have very watching carefully about what's the kind of motivations behind the production. And also this kind of threat perception has been kind of aggravated by the idea of kind of decoupling. It's not about North Korea, but it's more about how U.S. will react when North Korea actually take a kind of provocative measures to South Korea. So you can see that this threat perception is not, perfectly aligned with actual United States foreign policy. You have threat perception is more about subjective kind of understanding, kind of influenced by their domestic politics and their personal belief as well. So this idea of decoupling has been aggravated as we observe more North Korea's nuclear production. And also this idea of this interim measures, which has been very controversial in South Korea a few weeks ago when some White House officials mentions about taking interim measures when it comes to making a North Korea policy, which kind of making South Korea people to think, oh, United States is not interested in denuclearization anymore. So that kind of feelings and kind of misunderstanding actually aggravate threat perception in North Korea as well.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, that's an interesting,
Yeah.
interesting insight there. And so, I mean, you described this North Korean threat, and while President Yoon has been in office, he's really emphasized mending ties with Japan and
Right.
focusing on trilateral cooperation with the United States. But how do you think, with the recent elections, the results of that, how will that affect trilat cooperation?
Yeah, actually, recent general elections in South Korea has been devastating for President Yoon. Even though he maintains a number of seats, but compared to what they actually expected, their kind of result might be pretty disappointing, I guess. But when it comes to South Korean foreign policy, it's kind of comparative to United States is kind of disconnected to their election outcomes. And an election outcome does not mean that it will kind of reduce the geopolitical risk out of North Korea and Russia and China as well. So I don't think there will be a substantial changes when it comes to this election result. And President Yoon has more incentive to push through more a proactive way of conducting foreign policy in the future.
Well, do you think trilateral cooperation will remain resilient then, despite all these political
Well, it
transitions?
depends. South Korea is very willing to pursue and maintain trilateral cooperations. But when you're looking at United States, U.S. also facing elections, and Japan is also facing elections. And I'm not sure. It's a kind of combination of three countries' willingness when it comes to trilateral cooperations. But now we have a risk of a kind of electing another president of the United States who might not be interested in trilateral cooperation. So that's kind of worries we have in South Korea.
Gotcha, gotcha. So it's
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
South Korean domestic politics
Right.
that might be affecting
Yeah.
this, but we've got to look outwards to the U.S. and Japan as well. Well, I guess kind of going along on that theme, when President Yoon came into the office, he really emphasized his Indo-Pac strategy as having this goal of making Korea into a global pivotal state.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could briefly describe what that strategy entails and kind of give your assessment after he's been in office for 2 years, whether President Yoon has been successful.
Yeah. So idea of this global pivotal states is you have to think about the strategy of Indo-Pacific as well. Because from Yoon administration perspective, Indo-Pacific strategy is a kind of instrument to realize the role of global pivotal states in the Indo-Pacific. That's a kind of relationship between two ideas. And when it comes to this GPS, well, the Yoon administration has this different idea about what it means by national interest for South Korea compared to the Moon administration, the previous administrations. And the bottom line is that South Korea cannot no longer maintain this hedging strategy between U.S. China. So South Korea has been already an ally of the United States for the last over the decades. And South Korea maintained this democracy and market economy system, and that's why it becomes the current South Korea. So that understanding makes South Korea more aligned with like-minded countries. And Indo-Pacific is a very important strategic kind of space for South Korea to maintain that system as well as regimes as well with like-minded countries. So in that sense, South Korea has come up with this Indo-Pacific strategies, and by contributing more to make this system resilient, South Korea believes that it can kind of reach the goal of becoming a global pivotal state. So that's kind of relationship between two concepts.
Gotcha. And do you think, in your opinion, President Yoon has been successful with South Korea on that road?
So far, I think Yoon administration has put really much assets in realizing that goal. And actually, Ministry of Foreign Affairs was really busy, actually, compared to other administrations. They have a number of projects like trilateral and bilateral and other minilateral as well. And now South Korea is kind of moved to the level that trilateral multi-domain multi-domain military exercises with 3 countries. I think that's a kind of visible kind of accomplishment for South South Korea, not only they are kind of making this relationship between U.S., China, and Japan, but at the same time they're contributing the kind of stability of the Indo-Pacific as well. So I think Yoon administration has been done a really good work, I think, so far.
All right, so positive,
Yeah.
positive outcome there. But like you mentioned, his party, President Yoon's party, did
Right.
suffer a major blow
Right.
with the recent election. So how do you think that might affect maybe this global pivotal state policy or other aspects of President Yoon's foreign policy agenda?
Uh, so basically, the Moon administration and Yoon administration, or progressive parties and conservative party in South Korea, they used to have this different understanding about what kind of position South Korea should take vis-a-vis these two great power countries. And progressive now begin to understand that current geopolitical kind of landscape is no longer for South Korea to maintain hedging strategies because of this war in Ukraine, as well as Taiwan Strait contingency, as well as South China Sea kind of crisis, and progressive, they begin to understand that current geopolitical landscape is more give South Korea more incentive to align with like countries as well. So there is a kind of very slow, but there is a kind of changing in progressive blocs or opposition parties' understanding of international order. So I think in that sense, that current outcome, election outcome does not really kind of have a substantial changes in terms of foreign policy.
Gotcha. Well, how do you think the effects of the general elections on domestic politics might?
Well, that might be a huge kind of changes, I think, because progressive have a number of issues, not only about the Lee Jae-myung or Jungkook, but at the same time, number of social policies and economic policies they want to discuss with current ruling parties. So I think there will be a much more debatable issues in the coming years.
And I mean, we talked a little earlier about trilateral cooperation as well. Do you think the division in the National Assembly might push any issues with, President Yoon's kind of more alignment with Japan in pushing trilateral cooperation, or?
Well, that's a very interesting point. Actually, I conducted a recent survey about this trilateral cooperation at the public level, and public are very favorable about this trilateral cooperation when it comes to military kind of cooperations, because trilateral cooperation is originally created to deter North Korea back in like 20 years ago. And as North Korea becoming more provocative, South Korean public begin to understand that there should be a kind of collective security or collective deterrence measures, United States and other countries as well. So yeah, at the public level, they are very welcoming these trilateral cooperations, but I'm not sure how can they be translated into kind of legislative level, but there is a kind of more transforming kind of sentiment in the public.
Oh, could you describe a little bit more about this survey data that you're mentioning here?
Yeah, actually, I recently conducted this survey about these trilateral cooperations and how they actually view Japan, actually, kind of personally or kind of as a country. So, at the personal level, they see Japan is very favorably because we are visiting Japan very often, and Japanese people visit South Korea very often, and we actually go to Japan for travel, like study and businesses, and they prefer to have maintained this good relationship not only because of North Korea but also because of these economic transactions. So they argue that it is very important to maintain good relationship with Japan, but at the same time, if Japan can help with North Korea, then it's not a bad thing for South Korean people as well. So
Okay.
that's kind of main sentiment.
Well, were you surprised by these results?
Yeah, actually, I'm very surprised.
I feel like that kind of goes against the usual narrative that you hear.
And the vice versa was also true as well. Japanese people also view South Korea very favorably as well.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I guess kind of looking back at North Korea and thinking about the alliance, the U.S.-South Korea alliance, the question of assurance. Well, last year, South Korea and the U.S., we marked the 70th anniversary of the U.S.-ROK alliance, and we welcomed South Korea to contribute more to the nuclear planning process through the Washington Declaration, the Nuclear Consultative Group, and obviously increased trilateral cooperation, joint military exercises. So we've talked a bit about how South Koreans' perceptions of Japan apparently have changed
Right.
due to more economic factors, not necessarily North Korea, but how do these changes with the alliance and kind of that assurance, our assurance efforts, how have those efforts affected Koreans' views of the U.S. and the alliance in general?
Well, it is kind of reinforcing in a favorable way, especially when it comes to NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group, which has been created after the Washington declarations last year, was well received in South Korea as well. Because, as I mentioned earlier, South Koreans are really worried about North Korea threats. And that's why there was kind of 2 years ago and last year, there was a huge discussion about South Korea should develop its own nuclear weapons, which is pretty debatable and still debatable because North Korea nuclear threat has not been disappeared. So as long as there is a North Korea and developing nuclear weapon, that discussion will remain in the kind of underwaters, I think. But this NCG has kind of reassured South Korean public very much. And whenever South Korean people look at this military operations, military kind of exercises, as well as three countries kind of helping each other, that is kind of reassuring for now, for South Korean people, I guess.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And do you think things might change later on this year? That assurance?
Well, when it comes to this militarized cooperation, I don't think it will not that change in substantial way because, as I mentioned, three countries are working on very different operations and exercises to maintain stability in the regions, including other areas outside Korean Peninsula, like a more non-kind of combative purposive exercise like a humanitarian assistance as well. So I think three countries kind of cooperation will be well received, even if in spite of this general election outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, this was our quick take on South Korea's new foreign policy. What's your last, I guess, assessment on that? Is there going to be a new foreign policy agenda, or should we expect to see a lot more of the same?
Well, probably three countries will explore more areas of cooperations, not only in the military side, but also kind of non-traditional side, like building infrastructure for global South countries, like Southern Pacific countries, and helping ASEAN countries have more economic security as well, and helping women, peace, and security kind of project as well. So we have a lot to work on other projects.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a really great note to end on there.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, no, of course. It's been a pleasure having you here. I just want to give you just a quick thank you as well for joining us. And I also wanted to thank Director of Policy, Jonathan Corrado, here at the Korea Society for support and guidance, our media and IT team as well, Peter and Bradley, and our policy interns who also help a lot with this program, Heiji, Tashi, and Sonia. And thank you to everyone who was able to tune in as well for today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.